And now joining me is a man who also searched for the truth, Paul Thompson, author of The Terror Timeline, which was the basis for the film you're watching. As the Village Voice newspaper puts it, Paul Thompson's timeline is based on public documentation of what we know. It almost has to be taken more seriously than the 9/11 Commission report because it's open. There's nothing secret here. Welcome, Paul Thompson.
Thanks for having me.
Paul, thank you. You were working on environmental issues. What made you begin to get the urge to connect the dots?
Well, actually I think it was about 9 months after 9/11, I was turned on, thanks to some friends, about some articles that I had missed. I was like everybody else, just kind of following the front page stories about 9/11 and terrorism. And I found these articles on the web that were from very reputable newspapers that seemed to present a whole different story from what I'd been seeing just as a casual observer. So I kind of, at that point, almost like fell down the rabbit hole where I became so fascinated. And each time I would find out one new fact, then I would want to find out, 3 more. And it just kind of spiraled until it really became a passion for me.
And how did you meet the Jersey girls?
Mostly, well, I was in a totally different part of the country, so mostly communicating through the internet. I have to say that the internet is really responsible for everything here.
After 9/11, I began running an email service to about 1,000 people, and I would scour the world press on my own and get stories from outside the United States. One thing I noticed inside the United States, there was almost a feeling that if you asked questions, you were committing treason, that you were somehow disloyal. Did you run into this, or did you see this levied on the Jersey girls?
Well, in fact, after 9/11, there were several reporters who were fired for saying critical things relating to 9/11. There was one reporter who criticized what Bush did on that day, and he was fired the next day. So there was definitely a chill. It didn't affect me as just an internet researcher, or I don't think really the Jersey girls, but I think that there generally just was a desire for revenge at that time. People wanted very much to see something happen as a result, an attack on Afghanistan. And it wasn't a time for people to be wanting to ask questions. Anybody who did that, they kind of looked at you like, what's wrong with you? So it's something I think that continues to this day. It's a real reluctance to ask questions on this issue.
I remember when I actually had a wonderful feeling for the first several months after 9/11, because it seemed to me that the American people were behaving in a very adult fashion. There wasn't a lot of ranting and raving. We hadn't gone into Afghanistan yet, and I had hopes that we might go to the United Nations or something and say, put together a world force and go after these guys, or we will. And then, of course, it turned into a kind of cowboy act, and we're going it alone. When did you first get the idea that maybe these weren't casual mistakes that were going on, that information was actually being suppressed?
Well, like I said, my first reaction was finding these articles that I found were really fascinating, coming out in reputable newspapers, but really getting buried. I think that the problem first began with the media coverage and the way that oftentimes they would report things, but they would put them, on a back page. And so people were getting a really skewed view of events. And we just had, like I said, a very unquestioning time where people were listening to simple slogans like, you're either with us or you're with the terrorists, and they hate us for our freedoms and so forth. And there really wasn't that kind of critical analysis, I think, to really ask, why did these attacks happen? Why were they successful? And all the way until today, I don't think we've really had that conversation as a nation.
Well, it seems to me there are sort of 3 possibilities as to why information did not get analyzed and expressed in the press. You could say it's a huge conspiracy. or you could say it's in corporate interest to do that, or you could say that the reporters are human like everyone else and they participate in the zeitgeist of the country, that they're as affected by those feelings. Do you have an opinion about either one of those?
Well, I think there are a lot of different factors that all combined. One thing I was very shocked talking to the Jersey girls was they knew a lot of these reporters personally, talking to them, trying to get them to cover this or that. And they thought that almost every single one of them really wasn't that interested in the story and wished that they were on some other beat instead of reporting 9/11, which is just amazing to me because, I mean, this is one of the most pivotal events. And exactly, you know, who was behind it and all the intrigue and mystery, political intrigue. I would think a reporter would just, you know, be all over that. But there was a real lack of interest. So that is one factor, but there's so many different factors. Of course, the government withholding information is a very big factor, which continues to this day, keeping reports classified and so forth. So many different things, all kind of working in the same direction to squelch discussion and release of information.
You know, I used to use an image of the planet to explain social events for myself. The biggest circle around it was the equator. And as you get closer to the poles, the circles get smaller. So if the equator is the mean IQ, the higher the IQ, the smaller the number of people. So I have to think that in the press, as well as anywhere else, there's a kind of mediocrity principle at work, that most people are not gifted and not highly intelligent. Do you think it's something like that, that the people didn't see and perceive the importance of the story, or were they getting contrary instructions from their editors?
Well, I think, frankly, I think a lot of them didn't see the importance of the story. They didn't really see the questions in the first place, so they didn't try to answer them. I think a lot of them just sort of open and shut case. But the fact is that, you know, if you look at other sort of national tragedies, you know, the sinking of the Titanic, Pearl Harbor, these different types of things, they've been very, very closely analyzed. We know everything about the people involved, the events, everything. 9/11 here, you know, over 5 years later, there's still so many things we don't even know. I mean, look at the hijackers themselves. There are few. Muhammad Atta, everybody's heard of, the real, you know, evil-looking guy. But aside from a couple of them, these guys are complete ciphers. We don't know. You know, some of the cases we're not quite sure what their birth dates are, what they did in their lives, what their jobs were, where they were from. I mean, they're just total blanks. Don't you think that there would be some interest on the part of the media to try to, you know, answer some of these things? But for some reason, it was just sort of, yeah, whatever, it doesn't really make a difference. And there really wasn't that in-depth investigative journalism.
Thanks, Paul. Paul will be back with us a little later in the program.